On April 9th, 2018, officers at the Wadsworth City Police Department received a call from a family, their voices on the phone sounding very anxious. "Hello, is this the Wadsworth Police? We need your help. Our aunt, Margaret Doulas, 98 years old, lives on Page Street. We've lost contact with her for 3 days now. Earlier, one of her friends had stopped by her house several times to check on her, but there was no sign of her. Our aunt is very old and she lives alone. She never goes out. We don't know if she might have fallen somewhere inside the house. Please help us." Indeed, considering that Margaret Doulas was almost 100 years old and lived alone, accidents during daily activities were unavoidable. After receiving the call, the police quickly went to the address provided by the family. With the assumption that Margaret might have fallen or had an accident during her daily routine, the first step was to search the house. If she had fallen in some hidden area, perhaps she would respond if the police called her name. However, after many attempts to search around the house, the police found no trace of Margaret. They then expanded the search, canvassing the surrounding area and gathering information from neighbors to see if anyone had seen her. According to the neighbors, they last saw Margaret at her home on April 5th. Additionally, according to her friends and relatives, the last contact they had with her was 2 days earlier, on April 3rd. So what happened to Mrs. Margaret Douglas? This is a shocking case that drew worldwide attention in 2018. To learn the full details of how this case unfolded and who the perpetrator was, we invite you to watch the entire video. If you enjoy the way we present cases, please comment with a lot of number ones. Otherwise, just give the video a like. Don't forget to subscribe to Vane True Crime Cases to discover more thrilling cases from around the world. And now, let's dive in and shed light on today's case. On the evening of April 9th, while the police had still not located Margaret, Howard Lesher Reed and his wife, Cindy, went to Aunt Margaret's house to assist the investigators in searching for any clues she might have left behind. After turning the entire house upside down but finding no trace of her, Howard suddenly had a thought. His aunt, Mrs. Doulas, usually wore shoes, but as he walked past the closet, he noticed that only one shoe was lying on the floor. Driven by this clue, Howard decided to check the closet again, but little did he know that moment would haunt him for the rest of his life. When he opened the closet, Howard saw a pile of clothes that had been torn down and messily thrown into a heap at the bottom. As he looked more closely, he spotted Mrs. Doulas's favorite shoe. But as he bent down to get a better look, he was horrified. The shoe was still on Margaret's foot, but she was dead. What he had just found was, in fact, Margaret's body, cold and lifeless. Overcome with fear, he screamed, "Oh my God, Aunt Doulas, my God, she's dead." The police immediately rushed to the closet where Howard had discovered his aunt's body. The crime scene revealed that the closet was very small, measuring only about 1.5 by 2.5 feet. Margaret's body had been stuffed inside, fitting snugly within the space. She was found with disheveled and torn clothing, and bruises on her neck indicated she had been strangled to death. In addition, her head and face showed signs of injuries and bruising. A forensic examination determined that Margaret had been dead for approximately 3 days, placing her time of death around April 6th, and there were indications that she may have been sexually assaulted. Based on the initial autopsy results, the police concluded that this was a case of murder and robbery, as both the police and Howard and Cindy found that Margaret's wallet had gone missing when they searched the house. They also hypothesized that after the intruder broke in and killed Margaret, the perpetrator may have sexually assaulted her body. This wasn't entirely surprising, considering Margaret was elderly and had a habit of not locking her doors at any time. She likely trusted in the safety of her neighborhood, especially since she lived in a densely populated area with many close neighbors. The police continued to thoroughly search the house and surrounding area once more, when they unexpectedly found a white rubber glove in a flower bed near the back door. The police questioned Howard and Cindy, but they said that their aunt didn't own or use such gloves. Why had this strange glove appeared at the victim's house? Was it connected to Margaret's death? The police suspected that the killer, after murdering doulas, might have fled through the backyard and accidentally dropped the glove in the process. Seeing this as a critical piece of evidence that could break the case, they quickly collected the glove for DNA analysis. To assist in the investigation of this murder, the police have asked the victim's family, Howard and Cindy, to provide detailed information about the victim. Howard and Cindy said, Margaret Douglas, born on September 15, 1919 in Akron, Ohio, had 2 sisters and 1 brother, all of whom had passed away by 2018. After World War II, Margaret married a war veteran named Donald Douglas. They moved into the house in Wadsworth where Margaret was living before her murder. Although they had no children, they were content with their life together. In 2000, when her husband Donald passed away, she decided to remain in their home, living alone after his death, never remarrying. Margaret was always full of love for life, friendly, optimistic, and fiercely independent, never relying on others. She was close to several neighbors who kept an eye on her as she grew older. Howard and Cindy often did grocery shopping for her when she could no longer go out as frequently, and she relied on this support network to stay healthy and safe, never suspecting that anyone would deliberately try to harm her. When the neighbors heard of her death, they were deeply concerned and heartbroken. They were outraged at whoever was responsible for Margaret's murder. During interviews with her family, the police learned about a man named David who was quite close to Margaret. He occasionally helped care for her and did various tasks around her house. About a week prior, David had visited Margaret to check on her health and had informed Howard that she was doing well. The police decided to track down and question David. Initially, they went to his home but did not find him there. However, during their investigation, they quickly spotted him lingering near Douglas's house. When confronted by the police, David claimed that he was worried about Margaret's passing because he had been a neighbor of hers and wanted to know what was going on. Faced with police suspicion, David expressed concern that his fingerprints might be found inside Douglas's home. With suspicions that David might be involved in Mrs. Doulas's death, the police brought him to the station for questioning. According to David, he had stopped by Douglas's house a few days before her body was found. However, he willingly agreed to have his DNA tested to see if it matched the DNA found on the glove outside Douglas's house. The results showed that the 2 DNA samples did not match. David said the last time he saw Mrs. Doulas was on Wednesday, April 4th, when he visited her house and helped her take out the trash. On Sunday, April 8th, David went to her house again, but when he knocked, Margaret did not answer. Being a man, he didn't want to enter her home uninvited, fearing that she might be in the shower or undressed, which would put him in an awkward situation. His presence around Mrs. Doulas's house was because he was deeply concerned about her death and had decided to conduct his own investigation as a secret detective. At the same time, the police began investigating reports of car break-ins in the area, focusing on one particularly notable case. This incident occurred early in the morning on April 8th, just one day before Margaret's body was discovered. It was a carjacking that took place very close to Margaret's house. Then, on the night of April 13th, 4 days after Margaret's body was found, the police received a call about a break-in involving a trailer at a nearby construction site. One of the culprits had left a mobile phone at the scene. Upon examining the phone, the police discovered it belonged to a young man named Zachary. He was already known to the police for petty thefts and carjackings, but this time they wanted him for something far more serious: the murder of an elderly woman. The police found Zachary sleeping in his car at the parking lot of the local high school and took him to the station for questioning. Zachary quickly admitted to the trailer break-in when confronted with the evidence of his phone, which he had accidentally dropped during the theft. However, he completely denied any involvement in Margaret's murder. When the police recounted the details of the murder, Zachary revealed that a friend of his, Gavin Ramsey, had been with him during the trailer break-in. Moreover, Ramsey was involved in a string of smaller crimes they had committed before. Zachary insisted that all of these acts had been Ramsey's ideas and suspected that Ramsey might be connected to the murder. Armed with this information, the police immediately summoned Gavin Ramsey while he was hanging around Fairview Park. Knowing that Ramsey was a minor, the police specially invited his mother to the police station for questioning. In the interrogation room facing the police, Ramsey began to admit to some of the illegal acts he had committed, such as breaking into cars and stealing small items. Gavin then asked to speak to the investigators privately. After asking his mother to leave the room, he admitted to a more serious crime. That is, recently, Ramsey had committed a carjacking of a man he met on a dating site. However, when questioned about the murder of Douglas, Ramsey flatly denied any involvement. But his words were very hesitant. There was always some kind of psychological struggle. The police quickly grasped this characteristic and had the feeling that he was hiding something. The police immediately went to the Ramsey family home to conduct an investigation, searched his residence about Ramsey's involvement in the carjacking, and learned that the victim of the robbery was a 50-year-old man. It is believed that he may have met Ramsey through the dating app Grindr. Ramsey's mother asked the police to investigate the man for the possibility of her son being sexually assaulted and handed over to the police a mobile phone that her son had used. The police examined Ramsey's phone, in which Gavin's Google search history was full of searches about the Margaret Douglas case. And the worst of what they found was the biggest shock. There were many photos and videos of Douglas before and after the murder were found on Ramsey's mobile phone. Many of them were taken of Mrs. Douglas sleeping. Other images clearly show Douglas's body in a state of undress, and in some of the photos, Ramsey is seen using white plastic gloves, using the hands of Mrs. Douglas's body to perform masturbation. In addition, the police also found Mrs. Margaret's red wallet in Ramsey's bedroom. One thing that the police never thought of was a notebook of Ramsey, in which he recorded in meticulous detail his desire to kill and the truth about the serial killers he had studied. On one page, he wrote, "I just want to attack someone and beat them until they stop breathing. I really want to kill someone. I want to know what it feels like to stand over someone's dead body." By this time, it was certain that Gavin Ramsey was the one who murdered Mrs. Margaret and sexually assaulted her body afterwards. The police immediately arrested Gavin Ramsey. In the interrogation room, faced with undeniable evidence from the pictures and videos on his phone, Gavin Ramsey had to admit to the murder of Mrs. Margaret Douglas. Gavin Ramsey, a 17-year-old boy, was born on March 23, 2001, in a family of 4 brothers. When he was 10 years old, he was taken to the hospital for intervention for a mental disorder. During the next 7 years, he was treated with many drugs. According to his family, around the age of 17, he started drinking alcohol and using drugs, which made his mother and his whole family very afraid for his health and spirit. Returning to Gavin Ramsey's confession, he recounted the entire details of the murder of Mrs. Douglas as follows. On the evening of April 6th, Gavin Ramsey broke into Mrs. Margaret Douglas's house to stimulate adrenaline and took pictures of Mrs. Douglas sleeping. Later, when Mrs. Margaret woke up, she was extremely frightened when she realized that someone had broken into the house and was also filming and taking pictures of her. Because she was afraid that Mrs. Margaret would call out to the people around, Gavin pushed her to the ground and strangled her until she completely stopped breathing before he realized what he was doing. After killing Mrs. Margaret, Vane Ramsey took off her clothes and continued to take pictures of her body, in addition to masturbating to the body. These pictures and videos were saved in a secret folder called Dark. This folder is password protected, and the password of the folder is murder. Then, he stuffed Margaret's body into the bottom drawer of the wardrobe, took off all her clothes and piled them on top so that she would not be discovered. Then, he hurriedly fled the scene and returned to his home. In a conversation with investigators, Vane Ramsey also said that at first he had no idea who the house belonged to. He also claimed that he was a helpful child who often helped his neighbors clear snow, including Margaret Douglas. When asked about his feelings when he killed Margaret, Vane only apologized. He only wished that he could go back in time. Then he would not have done such a terrible thing. However, the judge certainly did not believe his words of remorse. Accordingly, with the entire indictment for intentional murder and sexual abuse, Vane Ramsey should have been sentenced to death. But because he was only 17 years old at the time of the crime, he was not eligible for the death penalty. But Vane was sentenced to life in prison without parole. However, in 2021, Ohio Senate Bill 256 was passed, prohibiting minors from being sentenced to life in prison without parole, making Vane eligible to appeal for parole 25 years later in 2043. He is currently being held at the Grafton Correctional Institution in Lorain County. What do you think about this horrific murder? Will Vane Ramsey wake up to his wrongdoings in 2043? And Margaret's family was certainly shocked by her death. According to sources, they protested strongly when the court sentenced her to life in prison with parole under Ohio Senate Bill 256. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to support Vane True Crime Cases by liking the video, subscribing to the channel, to see more thrilling true crime cases around the world. Goodbye, and see you in the next videos.